Trifles is a one-act play created by Susan Glaspell and was first performed August 8, 1916. The play begins with an abandoned farmhouse, messy and full of half-complete items. This was the home of Mr. and Mrs. aka Minnie Wright. Within this home, there is an ongoing investigation of a crime scene where we meet the characters of the play. Leading the investigation is Sheriff Henry Peters and County Attorney George Henderson. Along with them is neighbor and witness Lewis Henry. The men are additionally joined by Henry Peters' wife, Mrs. Peters, and Lewis Hale's wife, Mrs. Hale. One day when Lewis Hale, the neighbor of Wright's, visits the home and notices Minnie Wright calmly rocking on her chair. She tells him that her husband is dead upstairs. Hale goes upstairs and investigates and indeed finds the body of Mr. Wright, who has been strangled to death. We come back to the present where the men go upstairs and investigate while the women stay downstairs and more closely observe the oddities around the house. The men of the story, more specifically Henderson, do a very light investigation of the house and make sexist remarks throughout while investigating. Meanwhile, the women look more closely into the different objects around the house and find clues as to why the murder actually happened, picking up on what the men couldn't do. In the end, we understand that Minnie Wright did indeed murder her husband. However, as the woman found out, the story of Minnie Wright was a sad and tragic story, creating the audience to almost understand her actions. Now for my opinions. If I'm to be honest, I have to start off and say I'm not the biggest fan when it comes to theatrical plays. That's not to say I don't enjoy them, I'm just not the biggest fan of them personally. I'm more of a movie guy, being a film major and all. So that being said, I did enjoy the story, I just think that the theatrical presentation of it maybe would have hindered my appreciation of the film. However, I can appreciate a lot that went into the story. Something I really liked was the self-contained aspect of it. I think this would actually have more justice to it if it was performed in person rather than read on paper, so I can really appreciate the story more that way. Within the story is a very self-contained setting, and I feel it really creates a unique and fun atmosphere. The concept of the story being in this one location reminds me of movies like 12 Angry Men and Reservoir Dogs, both really good movies. I think that this self-contained setting really helps the story and the tone, as well as an overall metaphor for Minnie Wright's character. Before I get into the metaphors, I want to say I appreciate the poem for its use of women empowerment, as this poem was created almost a century ago, when women had a lot less empowerment with the social structure at the time. While the men in the story seemed a bit cartoony, I think there was an element of me having 21st century lens and almost not accepting the level of sexism that occurred at the time. I think I'm so used to how social standards are now that it seems ridiculous how the men like Henderson acted to the women at the time. All this being said, I really enjoyed the story arc that was created with Minnie Wright. The metaphors I found most interesting were of the cherry jar and birdcage symbolizing Minnie Wright's entrapment with this marriage as she was stuck in. However, like the metaphors, Minnie Wright eventually busted out, returning herself free from her marriage. Along with the metaphors, you have this setting of this house, which is very contained and closed off like Minnie Wright and her marriage and the other metaphors. While Minnie Wright's character arc is a bit twisted as she becomes free through the murder of her husband, I think her character arc is ultimately earned and satisfying as you understand her past being a bit tragic and sad through the little details in her house, with her marriage being an entrapment along with this house and setting.